The title of creator Fanny Herrero's new Netflix series, Standing Up, Droll, denotes not only the burgeoning stand-up scene in France, but also the courage and fortitude required of its entertainers. Amateur comics standing up in front of Paris, trying to convince the city to give them a chance. Ensuing the success of Herrero's beloved series Call My Agent, this new French comedy drama similarly draws an intimate portrait of characters from a shared industry. In the case of Standing Up, it's a diverse group of young voices, each facing their own challenges in order to succeed as stand-up comedians. There's Nezer Younesboussouf, the most talented writer of the group, and with the least to show for it. Bling Jean Sion, manager of the Droll Comedy Club, is crashing after a high point in his stand-up career, sometimes just struggling to get out of bed in the morning. In contrast, Aissatou Mariama has just made a breakthrough in the industry, but her success puts a strain on her relationships. And last, there's Apolline Elsa Gege, who wants so badly to become a comedian despite her mother's opposing sense of propriety. Ironically, for a show that intends to capture the spark of the Parisian live comedy scene, the stand-up fails spectacularly. At first chalked up to a realistic depiction of amateur performers, this excuse falters when one realizes the jokes are meant to land with audiences. And while they certainly don't, either due to poor English subtitling or a misunderstanding of what constitutes a quality act, the dramedy charms through a multitude of other measures. That is exceptionally true for the main characters brought to life by the aforementioned exceptionally charismatic talent whose lives encircle a niche subculture of France and yet manage to capture universal human experiences. It's this gritty authenticity, balanced by a light and easy-going tone, and elevated by an eclectic soundtrack, that makes this French drama so compelling. Standing Up hearteningly depicts real-life struggles without overdramatization, if only to disappoint by allowing many of these conflicts to taper off by the season finale. For example, the challenge Issa faces to push the boundaries of what is socially acceptable for the stage fizzles out in favor of focusing on the comedian's more cliched home life. Although several themes and storylines leave much to be desired, the overall unfinished quality of the six-episode dramedy opens its doors wide for a second season. There is much yet to explore about Standing Up's delightful cast of characters, their arresting narratives, and the future of the Droll. Episode 1 of Standing Up, Droll begins in Paris, with young comedians Nezer and Aissatou heading to the Droll Comedy Club, owned by fellow comic Bling. They are all struggling with something different. Nezer is fighting to earn enough money to support himself and his disabled father. Issa can't get enough people to come to her shows. Bling hasn't performed in months for lack of new material. Bling's producer, Laurent, shows up to the club unexpectedly. He insists that he perform, so Bling bumps Nezer from the lineup. Panicked about getting on stage again, Bling takes a drug and snorts it in the bathroom. He goes on after Issa, who does an amazing act about her boyfriend. But when Bling follows her, he falters. When someone heckles him from the crowd, he has a breakdown on stage. Nezer meets Apolline, who was in the audience. She asks when he next performs, and she promises she'll be there tomorrow night to see him. At home, Nezer's dad tells him he's not considered disabled enough to receive benefits. They go over their collective income, and Nezer can't see how they will be able to survive on the low salary. Bling holes up in his house after his bomb performance until Corinne urges him out of bed. She says he's not okay and implies that he needs help. He then gets a voice message from Laurent, who tells him he's decided to stop booking him. Issa, on the other hand, is getting amazing publicity. But Nezer worries that her boyfriend, Vlad, won't appreciate her jokes about him. Nezer gets rejection after rejection to job applications. Finally, his cousin offers him a job at a hotel, but the hours would conflict with his stand-up. He accepts the job and tells Corinne that he can't perform after tonight. Nezer has a successful act. He's pleased to see Apolline in the audience, but upset to see her with another guy afterwards. Bling loves Nezer's comedy so much that he asks him to write his sketches for him. Although Nezer initially declines, he eventually agrees to €90 an hour for the job. Back at Issa's house, Vlad is angry at her for humiliating him on stage. He can't stand the thought of people making fun of him. She promises to delete her act from social media, but when she goes to check it, she finds that it has gone viral. The episode ends with Isa joyfully laughing at her newfound success. Episode 2 of Standing Up, Droll, begins with Isa 2 and Nezer getting food. Nezer secretly calls Bling to tell him he can work for him this evening. He has plans to work with Isa. They plan to work tomorrow. He lies to Isa that he's working at a food service job. When they approach the venue, Isa is shocked to see the line of people waiting for her show. After the show, Nezer plays at the Droll. At Droll, Apolline is in the audience again, where she takes notes on the acts. After, she sees Nezer at the bar and asks him about how he started in comedy and what his comedic process is. The bartender interrupts, noting that Apolline often comes to take notes, which she shouldn't be doing. She swears to Nezer she's not a joke thief, comedy just interests her. Nezer laughs, but doesn't say much. Apolline goes home, where she lives with her aristocratic parents. She lies to them about where she was. Isa meets with Laurent, who represents her. Laurent plans for her to perform at a major venue, the same one where he used to book Bling. Isa runs into Bling outside, and she leaves without telling him the news. Bling asks for another chance with Laurent. After much convincing, Laurent decides he'll take a look at Bling's new material in 2 months. So, Nezer meets with Bling later to start working on material with him, but he doesn't offer much inspiration. At their child's school, Vlad agonizes that everyone knows about Isa's act and is judging him. He calls her selfish for sacrificing him for her job, but she reminds him of everything she's sacrificed for him. She's proud that her comedy is deconstructing social norms. Apolline shows up to Droll to apply for an open mic slot, though she's never performed. Bling tells her to come by again, but to bring people, otherwise the room will be empty. At home, she practices her act. Her mom almost catches her, but she lies to say she's preparing her art history presentation for school. Later, Apolline and her parents meet with Nathaniel Walsh to try and secure an internship for Apolline. Bling is unreliable and doesn't keep to the schedule he and Nezer set. So Nezer eventually insists on no more meetings. He'll send him material from now on, which Bling agrees to. Vlad tells Isa it's best if she doesn't come to his thesis defense. He's afraid people will recognize her and be reminded of her act. Isa is upset. She's rearranged her schedule, but she agrees. Bling doesn't like Nezer's notes. He thinks he's making fun of him, but Nezer tries to make him understand he'll be making fun of himself. Bling wants to talk about girls, likely in keeping with his misogynistic style, so Nezer asks him for details about girls he knows. He still doesn't cooperate. Isa later has an interview with Conbini at the Droll. Bling overhears when she mentions her slot at the Palace des Glaces, his old slot. He storms in, accusing her of stealing it, when he is the reason she got her start. Nezer finds Apolline outside the club at Newbie Comedy Hour. She tells him she's going to perform. Nezer gives her advice before she goes on. She keeps fiddling with her bracelet nervously, so she gives it to him to hold on to. She starts crying before she even starts, then runs off before Nezer can return the bracelet. Bling intensely watches Isa perform at the Droll that night. He decides to go on after her. Karine and Nezer try to stop him. Nezer makes a joke about Bling's sneakers right before Bling makes the same joke in his act. This causes Isa to look strangely at Nezer. Bling's act goes over well, though Isa doesn't admire him anymore for it. Nezer says she's being harsh with him, and Isa laughs. She says she knows he's writing for him, and he can do better. He asks her not to tell anyone. Isa shows up at the after-party to Vlad's thesis. When she gets there, people ask for tickets to her future performances. Vlad tenses up. Nezer goes to Apolline's house, where her mother greets him at the door. He says he's there to return her bracelet. Apolline makes an excuse that she forgot it in his Uber. Apolline asks how he found her, and he says she heard her give her address to a cab. Her mom gives him a tip, and Apolline shuts the door in his face. The episode ends with Nezer going on a food delivery. Episode 3 of Standing Up, Droll, begins with Nezer performing at the Droll. He talks about his experience bringing Apolline's bracelet back to her, not noticing until later that Apolline is in the audience. A woman named Agathe from the Talk Tonight show visits the club that night. She congratulates Bling on his performance and invites him to write for a segment on the show where comedians come up with jokes about guests. If it goes well, he could have his own segment. Nezzer initially tells him he can't help, that kind of show isn't his thing. He eventually gives in when Bling offers him 50% of his earnings. Nezzer ignores Apolline when he leaves the club, but she chases after him. She apologizes for slamming the door on him the other day. He then admits he was being intrusive. She confesses that her mother doesn't know she does stand-up or goes to the club. He encourages her to keep trying at comedy. Isa video chats with her mother, mentioning how her show is sold out for weeks. It turns out that her parents aren't so enthused about the racy nature of her act. They're embarrassed. She talks to her sister about it. Together, they pick out outfits for Isa to wear for her shows. As they leave the store, a couple of cops stop them, believing they have stolen the clothes. A crisis is averted when one of them sees Isa's ID. She gushes over her comedy, and they take a selfie together. Isa reprimands her sister for how aggressive she was toward them. Her sister just says she should talk about the encounter on Twitter, people would listen to her. But Isa says her Twitter is about her show. Later, Apolline texts Nezzer to ask him to help her with her stand-up. On his way, Bling calls him about his upcoming gig. Bling goes into a meeting with show producers. He pitches jokes about their guest that Nezzer gave him, and the producers love it. Just then, they get news that the expected guest isn't going to make it, so they arrange for a replacement. There are 3 hours before the show, so Bling has that long to prepare jokes about the new quest. He texts and calls Nezzer in a panic. But his friend is at Apolline's and doesn't answer. After taking drugs in the bathroom, Bling pitches his own material in a meeting, but his sexist jokes don't impress the producer. Meanwhile, Apolline practices her act in front of Nezzer. He's slow to give her feedback, so she thinks it's terrible. He tells her it's good, just too specific and weird. People have to be able to relate to her. She gets angry, thinking he accused her of imitating someone else. In the kitchen, she drops a wine glass. The shock of it diffuses her anger. He puts oven mitts on her feet to protect them, and they almost kiss, but her friends suddenly arrive. She invites them in, but asks Nezzer not to tell them she wants to do stand-up. Nezzer stays over as the friends start to party and get high except for Nezzer. Apolline tells him she loves him, but he shrugs this off as her being under the influence. He tells her to have fun with her friends and leaves. Later, he meets with Isa and Vlad. He describes Apolline's house, how the party felt like too much. Bling leaves him a voice message to tell him he's let him down, and he won't be paying him. Isa tries to convince Nezzer he could make a living showcasing his own talent. That night, Vlad asks Isa if it's time to make a baby. She tells Vlad she's not sure anymore about having a second child. So much is happening in her life. Vlad just responds, okay. Bling parties that night, getting high and hitting on a lot of women until he's eventually left alone to dance by himself. The next day at the Droll, when a customer complains several times about his wine, Bling takes it back to urinate in it. 2 people see this, but don't do anything. The next day, Apolline leaves a voice message for Nezzer. She starts it off by joking that she doesn't want to see him anymore, but then says she is kidding. She would love to talk with him soon. His father plays the message while Nezzer is in the kitchen. He only hears the first part before accidentally deleting it. He tells Nezzer there was a message from a woman, but it just disappeared. So, he relays that it wasn't very nice. She doesn't want to see him again. In her next bit at the Droll, Isa talks about her experience being stopped by the police the other day. She gets a good response, but Laurent appears uncomfortable. He says her show shouldn't be a political rally. People should be able to listen and unwind. It would be idiotic for her to risk losing her audience so early in her success. Later at Droll, the employee who saw Bling complains to his sister Karine. She says if Karine does nothing about it, she will do something. She also tells her that Laurent fired Bling, which Karine didn't know. Isa prepares to perform in front of a full house at the Palace des Glaces. Despite Laurent's advice, she does her act about the police anyway, closing it with the statement "Black goes with everything." She receives roaring applause. Apolline confesses to her mother she's not sure what she wants to do. She has done so much school, but thinks she'd like to try something else. Her mom thinks she's rejecting adversity. Later, Apolline takes an exam, and the teacher catches her cheating. He says she will have to show for a disciplinary meeting, and her exam will be considered void. She'll also be banned from exams for 5 years. She lies to her parents, telling them the exam went well. Thinking about what the incident means for her future, she smiles to herself. The episode ends with Nezer calling Agaid from Talk Tonight. He tells her he wants to become a writer for the show. Episode 4 of Standing Up, Droll, begins with Aissatou taking care of her daughter at home. Lauren calls to give her news that she'll be performing in an even better venue as a headliner for multiple comedians. Nezer gets a gig writing for the Talk Tonight show, and they love him. They invite him to write more often. Now that he's doing well on his own, Nezer tells Bling he can't work for him anymore. When Nezer leaves, Bling throws things at him from his balcony. It doesn't bother Nezer too much, because things get even better for the comic. Issa asks him to be her opening act when she performs at the Olympia. Apolline lies to her mother about continuing to take exams and goes to the Droll instead. She asks Issa to read over her jokes, but she's resistant. When Laurent arrives to speak with Issa, Apolline offers to take care of her daughter to get on her good side. When Nezer arrives at the Droll late, Bling says he can't perform. Others protest too, so he tries to kick everyone out, but Corinne intervenes. She yells that he's the one with the problem and that he should leave. He gives her the keys and storms out. Issa and Nezer talk afterward about how Bling used to be cool. Issa even used to date him for a couple of months before she met Vlad. The scene cuts to Bling now. Outside his flat, he finds a baby bird and takes it inside, where he feeds it. Apolline is babysitting Issa's daughter at the Droll when one of her friends, Victor, shows up. When the little girl asks if he is her boyfriend, he answers yes at the same time Apolline answers no. When Apolline says she's doing stand-up, he thinks the idea is ludicrous. He found out she can't take exams, but his father could help the penalty go away. He hugs her, just as Nezer peeks into the room. This prompts Nezer to go on a date with Farah, a woman he recently met. On their date, their differences become apparent, including Farah's slow uptake on Nezer's jokes. Because Laurent has a party invite for Issa that could lead to a movie role for her, she has to cancel helping Nezer with a show. That night, Issa watches Apolline's video. She calls to tell her she likes it, and that Apolline needs to become more comfortable performing now. When Nezer shows up for his stand-up gig, he's surprised to find the place is packed. When Issa calls him to cancel at the last minute, he blows up at her. Nezer still manages to hype the crowd without Issa, only faltering slightly when Apolline arrives. She asks if there's room for a beginner in the show. Nezer encourages her before she goes on. Apolline's bit about her horse Pistachio goes over very well. Farah notices Nezer hanging on her every word. She leaves without Nezer even noticing. When Apolline gets off the stage, she runs to hug Nezer, and they kiss. She asks to go to his place afterward. Victor arrives at Apolline's house while she is doing stand-up. He mentions the disciplinary procedure to her mother, believing she already knew about it. Meanwhile, things aren't going well for Issa at this party. She doesn't meet famous directors like she expected, although she does get mistaken for a waitress because of her outfit. When Apolline suggests she and Nezer go up to the roof, he confesses that his brother died falling off a roof 10 years ago. While they are in Nezer's room later, Nezer's father returns from his outing. He insists it's too late for Apolline to go home, so she stays over. The episode ends with Nezer in his father's room and Apolline in Nezer. Episode 5 of Standing Up, Droll, begins with Aissatou quietly crawling on the floor to keep her daughter from waking up. Laying in bed with Vlad later, she realizes her period is late. She takes a pregnancy test that night, it's positive. While Issa stares in shock, Vlad waves his hands excitedly. When Apolline gets home, her mom inquires about her last day of exams. She knows Apolline is lying to her, but she doesn't say anything. Issa and Vlad go to the doctor to ask about their options. They learn she is 8 weeks pregnant, and the legal limit for abortion is 12 weeks. Bling meanwhile has been at home with his baby bird. Nezzer comes to check on him one day early to ask for the money Bling owes him. He can only give him part of it, so he asks him to come back tomorrow. He also asks Nezzer to hang out with him for a bit. Nezzer initially leaves, but turns back later. He approaches the door the same time Bling opens it. It swings into Nezzer's face, breaking his tooth. Bling convinces Nezzer to take a little morphine before they go see his dentist, Bling's brother. In the waiting room, Bling confesses his worries and regrets. Nezzer says he should talk about these real struggles in his stand-up, but Bling says he doesn't know how. Vlad and Isa have opposing perspectives on having another baby. Vlad tries to convince their daughter a brother or sister would be great, while he's really trying to convince Isa. After a set at the Droll, Isa apologizes to Nezzer about ditching him the other day. Fans and people wanting to interview her repeatedly interrupt. Nezzer leaves while she's occupied with someone else. Isa is to appear on Talk Tonight, but Nezzer claims that he shouldn't write jokes about her. Still, the producer asks Nezzer for facts about her, specifically asking about her first viral sketch. Apolline continues to hone her act at the Droll. She sends a video of her act to a comedy website called The Laundromat, then tries to plan a meetup with Nezzer. They book a hotel room. When Apolline leaves the house, her mom goes through her things. She finds records of her comedy gigs and her relationship with Nezzer. When they get to their room, Nezzer asks who Victor is to her. She says she just sleeps with him occasionally, but finds him kind of boring, and Nezzer insists that he doesn't mind this. They then sleep together for the first time. Nezzer later takes Bling to a nursing home where he can perform and hone his acts. He does extremely well. Afterward, he dances with residents. He tells Nezzer it's been so long since he felt useful like this. When Apolline's act gets accepted by the Laundromat, she shows up at the venue. She's surprised to find that it's actually a laundromat, with only a microphone in the middle of the room. While Apolline does her act, her mother lurks outside the laundromat to listen. When Apolline sees her, she stops her act to chase after her. Nezzer follows. Her mother tells Nezzer to leave her daughter alone, then runs off. At home, her mother says she doesn't know Apolline anymore. She thinks she's going through a manic phase, so she's going to schedule a doctor's appointment for her. Apolline packs a suitcase as if she's moving out, and then moves to a maid's room on the 6th floor. Vlad continues to try and convince Isa to keep the baby, which stresses her outright before she goes on Talk Tonight. The host brings up personal details Nezzer gave him about Vlad's reaction to the sketch that was about him. Isa insists their source is misinformed. Nezzer tries to apologize immediately after the show, but Isa slams her dressing door in his face. Nezzer comes up to Apolline's new place. When they have sex again, Apolline can tell something is wrong. Nezzer says she's the first girl he slept with who has to touch herself when having sex. She says she does it because she feels comfortable with him. But it makes him realize she doesn't need him in any aspect of her life. She assures him he's changed her life for the better. After they sleep together, Nezzer notices he lost his tooth again. The episode ends with both of them laughing about Apolline having Episode 6 opens with Bling feeling himself with a good morning routine. He's feeling so balanced that he books himself on the newbie spot of the comedy show. He is enjoying his comedy material. As for Nezzer, he doesn't like how far Tiflet went personally in recent appearances. He tells Isa that she handled the situation greatly, but she is angry, feeling that her personal life was shared. Later on, Isa tells Laurent that she needs to get a mole removed, but it is only benign. Laurent freaks out, fearing the worst. Apolline is frustrated due to her looming family crisis. She's only started to feel herself in this scene. She expresses her annoyance to Nezzer at how long it will take her to have her own show. Also, her unpredictable mother is worried about her life, even though Apolline needs to look after her. The doctor prescribes her mother medication to help her, but it soon becomes evident that Apolline will need to be back with her privileged family life, which is the last thing she wants. To get back at Tiflet, Nezzer gives him a plagiarized sketch, which the comedian uses on television. This will hurt him, and Isa is grateful for what Nezzer has done. But, after a comedy night, Lauren tells Nezzer that he will not be performing at the famous Olympia due to Tiflit's reaction. Isa is furious. Nezzer tries to contemplate this news, but becomes consumed by it. The following day, Apolline sends him a voice note telling him she hasn't got time for relationships and a career because she'll be taking care of her mother. At this point, this romance looked dead, the ending of Standing Up, when it looks like Bling has turned things around, it all goes to ST for the character in episode 6. The night before Olympia, Bling gets tempted into a night of drinking. He wakes up the next day in a bouncy castle, and he has no idea where he is. He tries to rush to Olympia. At Olympia, Isa and Nezzer learn that Bling will not make it. And so, Isa tells Nezzer he will feature on the stage despite having no material. Nezzer heads on stage anyway and smashes it. Isa performs well too, as they both make their dreams come true. Meanwhile, Bling is distraught for spiraling once again. After the night ends, Apolline passes Nezzer in her fancy family car, and she feels heavily conflicted. She chooses to leave the car, and she runs up to Nezzer, smiling. Standing Up wraps up its short season with a true-to-life representation of life and stand-up comedy, in keeping with the rest of the season. It's this gritty realism, balanced by a light and easy-going tone, that makes this French drama so compelling. We see this especially in Bling and Isa's arcs in this episode, as both face down challenging obstacles in their paths to success. For Bling, it's falling into his own expectations of himself that he can't be good enough. For Isa, it's relationships and responsibilities holding her back from everything she knows she can accomplish. Apolline's arc with Mother comes to the most disappointing conclusion, having ended before it could even begin. The most rewarding end of the season, however, is Nezzer's, whose humble charm embodies the life of the series. With this tangle of storylines behind, Standing Up concludes on a bittersweet note, leaving us curious and a bit nervous for where these four comics are heading next.